The HOA fined me because of my house color, but they forgot one legal detail. My name is Daniel Ramirez, and 3 years ago, I finally achieved my dream of owning a home in Palm Harbor, Florida. After 15 years of saving and working double shifts as a paramedic, I purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in Cypress Palms, a planned community with palm-lined streets and manicured lawns. The house wasn't perfect. The kitchen needed updating and the backyard landscaping was neglected, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was the power of the Cypress Palms Homeowners Association. Sure, I'd signed the covenant during closing, skimming through the 47-page document filled with regulations about everything from mailbox designs to approved plant species. The realtor had assured me it was standard stuff and nothing to worry about. For the first 2 years, things were peaceful. I renovated the kitchen, planted native Florida flora to attract butterflies, and became friends with most of my neighbors. Mrs. Peterson, a retired teacher next door, often brought over her famous key lime pie, and Dave and Maria across the street invited me to their weekend barbecues. Then came the hurricane. Not a major one by Florida standards, just a Category 1 that swept through last August, but it damaged a section of my exterior stucco. The insurance covered it, and I decided this was the perfect opportunity to repaint the entire house. The original color was a pale beige that had faded to an almost sickly yellow. I wanted something that felt more like me. After browsing color samples for weeks, I settled on a warm terracotta, reminiscent of the earthy tones I'd fallen in love with during a trip to Santa Fe years ago. I hired a local painter, Jose, who did an impeccable job. The color transformed my house from forgettable to vibrant, and I received compliments from several neighbors. "Your house looks amazing, Danny," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed. "Reminds me of those beautiful homes in the Mediterranean." I was beaming with pride, until the letter arrived. The HOA notice was printed on cream-colored cardstock with the association's palm tree logo at the top. In formal language, it informed me that my house color was not in compliance with approved exterior palette options, as outlined in Section 12.4 of the Community Covenant. I was being fined $100 per day until I repainted. My stomach dropped. At $100 daily, I'd be looking at thousands in fines within weeks. I immediately called the number listed for Gerald Wilkins, the HOA president. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ramirez," Gerald said, his voice carrying that practiced customer service tone that wasn't sorry at all. "But the rules are very clear. Exterior colors must be selected from the approved palette. Your terracotta is not on that list." "But I wasn't given any palette to choose from," I protested. "It's in the covenant you signed," he replied coolly, "and available on our community portal." I spent that night digging through boxes until I found my copy of the covenant, flipping frantically to Section 12.4. There it was, a reference to an Appendix C with approved color selections. But there was no Appendix C attached to my document. Thus strained. Next day, I logged into the community portal with the credentials I'd been given years ago and never used. After navigating through several outdated pages, I found a color palette chart, but the file was dated 3 months ago, well after I'd painted my house. Something didn't add up, and I wasn't going to back down without a fight. The daily fines were adding up, and the stress was getting to me. My shifts at the hospital seemed longer, and I found myself snapping at colleagues. During lunch breaks, I researched Florida HOA laws on my phone instead of unwinding. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I reached out to several neighbors to see if anyone had a complete copy of the original covenant with the elusive Appendix C. Most were sympathetic but couldn't help. "Those board members can be real sticklers," Dave said, shaking his head as we stood in his driveway. "Remember when they made the Johnsons remove their basketball hoop? Their kid was devastated." Maria chimed in. "You should talk to Sophia Vega in the Blue House on Magnolia Street. She's an attorney, I think. That suggestion turned out to be pivotal. Sophia wasn't just an attorney. She specialized in real estate law and had previously worked with HOA disputes. When I explained my situation, over coffee on her screened-in porch, her eyes lit up. "Did they ever formally notify all homeowners about the color palette changes?" she asked, the ceiling fan whirring above us as we sipped Cuban coffee. "Not that I remember," I replied. "And when exactly did you paint your house?" "Finished on July 12th, I said. "The file on the portal is dated October 3rd. Sophia smiled, the kind of smile lawyers get when they spot something others have missed. "Daniel, in Florida, HOAs must follow specific procedures to modify covenants or implement new rules. They can't retroactively enforce changes without proper notification and sometimes even a homeowner vote." She offered to look into my case, asking for copies of all documents I had. Over the next week, Sophia made some calls and dug through county records. What she discovered left me speechless. The original covenant, from when Cypress Palms was established in 1997, did include color restrictions, she explained during our follow-up meeting. But in 2012, when they updated several regulations, they failed to properly file the color palette with the county. More importantly, they never legally incorporated it into the binding covenant through the required processes. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, hope building. "It means," she said, leaning forward, "that at the time you painted your house, there was no legally enforceable color restriction. The palette they're citing was implemented improperly and cannot be retroactively enforced against you." Sophia helped me draft a formal response to the HOA, citing Florida Statutes Chapter 720, which governs homeowners associations, specifically pointing out their procedural failures and the legal principle against retroactive enforcement. We sent the letter via certified mail. Then we waited. 2 weeks passed with no response from the HOA. The daily fines continued to accumulate, now exceeding $3,000. Neighbors began taking sides. Some, like Mrs. Peterson and the Johnsons, openly supported me, even offering to contribute to legal fees if necessary. Others avoided eye contact when I waved, clearly uncomfortable with anyone rocking the community boat. Gerald Wilkins and 2 other board members, Patricia Thompson and Richard Klein, began conducting inspection walks past my house, taking photos and making notes on clipboards. It felt like intimidation. One evening, as I returned from a particularly difficult 12-hour shift where we'd lost a young car accident victim, I found a final notice taped to my door. The HOA was escalating the matter. They would be placing a lien on my property if I didn't comply within 7 days. That was the breaking point. I called Sophia immediately. "They can't do this without a proper hearing," she assured me. "You have rights under Florida law. It's time to go on the offensive." We filed a complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which oversees disputes between homeowners and HOAs. Additionally, Sophia suggested we prepare for potential litigation. "I've reviewed everything," she said. "Not only did they fail to properly implement the color restrictions, but I also found minutes from a 2019 board meeting where they explicitly discussed the need to update the covenant to include the new color palette, an admission that they knew it wasn't properly incorporated." 3 days later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Robert Cantwell, the HOA's attorney. "Mr. Ramirez," he began formally, "I've reviewed your complaint and the documentation your attorney provided. The board would like to schedule a meeting to discuss a resolution." The meeting was set for the following evening in the community clubhouse. I arrived with Sophia, prepared for battle, feeling both nervous and determined. Gerald, Patricia, Richard and their attorney sat on one side of a conference table, faces stern. The room smelled of furniture polish and tension. Robert Cantwell spoke first. "After careful consideration of the points raised in Ms. Vega's letter, we acknowledge that there may have been procedural oversights in the implementation of the color palette restrictions. Gerald looked like he'd bitten into a lemon. Patricia stared at her folded hands. However, Cantwell continued, the board feels strongly that community aesthetic standards must be maintained. Sophia responded calmly but firmly. My client understands the importance of community standards. However, those standards must be legally established and fairly enforced. Florida Statute 7-23035 is quite clear on this matter. The negotiation lasted nearly 3 hours. Voices were raised, Florida statutes were quoted, and community values were invoked. Finally, exhausted and seeing no clear path to victory, the HOA made an offer. They would waive all accumulated fines if I agreed to repaint when I would naturally need to repaint in the future, estimated at 5 to 7 years. Before I could respond, Sophia countered. My client has been subjected to significant emotional distress, public embarrassment, and threats to his property rights. We're prepared to file a civil suit for harassment and improper HOA practices if this matter isn't resolved. Appropriately, the room fell silent. Robert whispered something to Gerald, who frowned deeply before nodding. We'll waive the fines, Gerald conceded, his voice strained. And the house color can remain until the next regularly scheduled painting. Additionally, we'll cover Mr. Ramirez's reasonable legal expenses in this matter. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside I was celebrating. We had won. The resolution with the HOA marked a turning point, not just for me, but for the entire Cypress Palms community. Word spread quickly about how I had successfully challenged the board's authority, and it sparked something unexpected. A community-wide conversation about governance, fairness, and the purpose of our HOA. 3 months after our confrontation, in the clubhouse, the annual HOA board elections were held. Participation was at an all-time high, with over 80% of homeowners casting votes compared to the usual 30%. Gerald Wilkins was not re-elected as president. Instead, Maria from across the street won by a substantial margin, running on a platform of transparency and reasonable enforcement. An HOA should protect property values and foster community, not divide us, she declared in her campaign email. Rules matter, but so does the human element. Patricia Thompson retained her seat, but adopted a noticeably more flexible approach. Richard Klein chose not to run again. Under new leadership, the board undertook a complete review of the covenant, organizing community workshops to discuss which rules were truly necessary and which ones could be relaxed. They created a clear process for homeowners to request exceptions or variances. The color palette was expanded to include more diverse options, including terracotta. My house became something of a local landmark. The terracotta house with the butterfly garden, people called it. I even caught a real estate agent using it as a reference point during an open house, 2 streets over from the terracotta house. Sophia and I remained friends after the case, occasionally meeting for coffee. 6 months after our victory, she shared some interesting news. You know, your case created ripples beyond Cypress Palms, she said. 2 other communities in the county are revising their HOA procedures, citing what happened here as a wake-up call. On the 1-year anniversary of painting my house, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. Nearly 40 neighbors attended, including some board members. Mrs. Peterson brought her key lime pie, Dave manned the grill, and even Gerald Wilkins made an appearance, briefly nodding in my direction before helping himself to the buffet. As the sun set, casting an orange glow that perfectly complemented my home's exterior, Maria raised a toast. To good neighbors, fair rules, and the courage to stand up for what's right, she said. We all clinked glasses, and in that moment, I felt a profound sense of belonging. This was what community was supposed to be, not rigid conformity enforced through threats and fines, but people living together with respect for both shared standards and individual expression. The financial compensation from the HOA had been satisfying, certainly. It covered Sophia's fees and allowed me to finally complete my backyard landscaping. But the real victory was much more valuable. A community that had found its way to a healthier balance between rules and compassion. As my guests chatted and laughed under string lights in the warm Florida evening, I looked at my terracotta house, glowing in the twilight, and smiled. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about winning, it's about creating space for something better to emerge.